That day, Dora misunderstood me. She was sure that I had pushed her sweetheart, Jack, down the stairs. She was furious and decided to teach me a lesson. I was locked in the basement, and the 4 dark years became a time of reflection in her eyes. She invited 2 cruel women, whose only mission was to turn me from a living man into a submissive and docile good boy. I went through extreme torture. My tendons in my hands and feet were broken, my body was ravaged, and my face was utterly disfigured. One morning 4 years later, Dora finally remembered me and ordered me to be released from the dungeon. But at that moment, my heart was dead. I could no longer love her. I stayed in the dim environment of the basement for too long and finally walked out of the heavy iron door. The dazzling sunlight made me close my eyes involuntarily. When I opened my eyes again, the scene in front of me made my heart beat faster instantly. Dora, still as noble and cool as ever. She stood there, wearing a high-end dress, as if she was far away from my world. I stood in front of her, my body was dirty, my hair was messy, and I smelled bad. I felt a strong sense of uneasiness in my heart, and I lowered my head and whispered, "M.O. Dora." She looked up at me and said coldly, "Raise your head." I trembled and slowly raised my head. She was still the beautiful woman in front of me. However, when she saw the scar on my face, she showed a trace of astonishment. Your face, what's wrong with you?" Her voice trembled slightly. I lowered my eyes. My heart was broken. The pain in my heart was almost unbearable. The bodyguard standing next to her whispered, "David scratched himself accidentally." She turned to look at me and asked, "Is that true?" I clenched my hands tightly with thousands of words in my heart, but I couldn't say a word. It was she who ordered the inhuman torture that I suffered, leaving scars on my face that could not be healed. I remember once, they planned to carve the word slave on my face. I struggled desperately, but the result was this unspeakable mark. Dora didn't ask any more questions and turned to walk to the car park nearby. I followed her, walking so slowly that it annoyed me. I had broken my limbs and flexors, so I couldn't walk as fast as she did. She looked back at me, her voice filled with impatience. "You're so slow? Don't you want to leave? Do you believe me? I'll throw you back to the basement?" I panicked instantly and shook my head hastily. "No, no. Please don't send me back to the basement." She sneered and seemed satisfied with my reaction. Her tone softened. "It seems that the decision I made back then was the right one. You have indeed learned your lesson now." I suppressed the bitterness in my chest, but I secretly decided in my heart that I would never give her a cent again. I opened the car door and got in. The car started, and the scenery outside the window rapidly receded, but she in the car was still as perfect as ever, as if there was an insurmountable gap between her and me. I thought she might love me, until that man, Jack, came back into her life, and she told me that it was just a family arrangement, and she didn't love me at all. It was not until that moment that I realized that all my efforts were in vain. For years ago, Jack came back and falsely accused me of pushing him, causing him to be seriously injured and hospitalized. Dora was furious and locked me in the basement to make me reflect on myself. I realized that the lessons of those 4 years were nothing but a nightmare she carefully planned. Suddenly, Dora frowned and sniffed the air in disgust. "What's that smell?" I looked down and found that my arm was bleeding. When I left the basement, the vicious guards warned me not to talk nonsense after I came out, and they hit me hard with a chair. I saw blood dripping on the seat, and I squatted down in panic and wiped it with my sleeve. "I'm sorry, Dora. I made a mess on your seat. I'll clean it right away," I whispered. She looked at me coldly, her brows furrowed. "David, how did you become like this?" I smiled bitterly. The pain in my heart almost swallowed me. It was her. She pushed me into this abyss with her own hands. And now, she actually asked me why it became like this? Isn't this exactly what she wanted? After wiping the seat clean, I didn't sit back down, but curled up carefully in the corner. My body still smelled of blood, and I was afraid that the smell would disgust her. I didn't dare to move rashly, and every move was filled with fear of her. Dora looked at me with a puzzled look, frowning slightly. "David, didn't you always like to stick to me before? Why are you so far away from me now?" I didn't know how to answer her. The scenes that I had imagined countless times at night now turned into unspeakable pain. For years had passed, and all the memories and emotions were destroyed. 2. Why? In the past, I had hoped that she would appear like she did in the past and take me away from the darkness of the basement in countless dark nights. But she never showed up. That night, she chose to believe Jack's words threw me into the dungeon, and abandoned me from then on. Gradually, I became numb, and my longing for her became weaker and weaker. Whenever I tried to miss her, the pain in my heart was like a knife cutting into my heart. Every day, I was subjected to nothing but cruel torture and insults. My body was already overwhelmed, and every inch of my skin was covered with wounds. They forced me to bark like a dog. How dare a loser like you like Dora? Their ridicule pierced my heart like a needle. You are just a dog. Stop dreaming, or I will beat you to death. Do you hear me? I was beaten all over, but I could only cry and surrender. Every time I was beaten to unconsciousness, no one cared whether I lived or died. The basement became my hell, and I no longer had the courage to love her. That kind of pain was deeply buried in my heart and became a wound that could not be healed. I know, I've learned my lesson. Thinking of this, I bowed my head and apologized softly. I'm sorry, I know I was wrong. We arrived at the villa. As soon as I got off the car, I saw Jack walking down from upstairs with a smug smile on his face. David, welcome home. He spoke in a friendly tone, but the teasing in his eyes was not concealed. But how did you become like this? You must have suffered a lot. Don't blame Shinru. She just wants to train you. I didn't respond, feeling heartbroken. Dora seemed a little dissatisfied and glared at me. Are you deaf? Didn't you hear Jack talking to you? I shuddered and fell to my knees involuntarily. I'm sorry, Dora. Don't be angry. I won't do it again next time. Jack looked down at me with satisfaction, then turned to Dora and said, Shinru, don't be so mean to David. Dora's tone became soft, but with a hint of coldness. Jack, you are too kind. Don't forget that if he hadn't pushed you down the stairs, you wouldn't have been lying in the hospital for so many days. Her words were like a knife, cutting into my heart. For years ago, I tried to defend myself and tell her that I didn't push Jack. But now I don't want to say anything. No matter how I explain, it's futile. She no longer loves me, and all my efforts have become meaningless. Dora looked at me and ordered, Take him to a bath. He stinks. The nanny stepped forward, looking embarrassed. But I accidentally threw away all of David's clothes before. Why not let him wear the maid's clothes? Jack snorted coldly, his eyes somewhat displeased. David is Shinru's husband in name only. How can you let him wear servants' clothes? I immediately said, It's okay. I can wear it. In the days in the basement, they often stripped me naked and hung me up, mocking me as a dog who didn't deserve to wear clothes. Now I no longer care about this humiliation. The servant threw the clothes in my face, pinched his nose, and said angrily, Don't dirty my clothes. I lowered my head, feeling deeply humiliated. This was my home, but now I was living under someone else's roof. Even a servant could ignore me like this. I spent a long time bathing, and my body was covered with scars of varying ages. The scent of the shower gel could not cover up the pain on my skin. Every time the wound touched the water, it would sting violently. When going downstairs, Dora's voice came from hell. David, do you think you are still the eldest son of the Shun family? Do you know how long we have been waiting for you? I lowered my head and apologized tremblingly. I'm sorry, I didn't know you were waiting for me to eat. When she saw the scar on my face, a trace of disgust flashed in her eyes. Come over and have dinner. I hurried over, sat down, lowered my head, and tears fell silently into the bowl. For years of hellish life have made me lose my loved ones and everything I once had. The home I once owned has gone bankrupt and completely ruined. Now I am homeless. I reached for the food on my plate, my fingers trembling as they touched the food. Doris suddenly shouted angrily, David, are you a dog? How can you eat like this? Are you trying to disgust us on purpose? Her words were like poison, making me tremble all over. 3. Her roar made me realize that this was not a basement. I said at a loss. No, I didn't mean to. I just haven't gotten used to eating with chopsticks yet. In the basement, if I wanted to eat, I had to compete with the dog for food. At first, I resisted and would rather starve than snatch the food. But when they saw that I was disobedient, they beat me with sticks and forced me to snatch food from the dogs. My legs were broken, so I could only crawl over to compete with the dog for food. I was bitten all over by the dog. In the end, I stuffed the food I snatched into my mouth with tears in my eyes and swallowed it down while enduring the stench. If you lose the fight, not only will you have nothing to eat, but you will also have to bark like a dog to please them. Jack shook Dora's hand, pretending to be understanding. David may not be used to it after just coming out of the basement. Give him some time. Dora thought the food on the table was dirty, so she ordered the servants in a cold voice, Remove the food from this table. Although I was very scared, I still stretched out my hands to protect the food on the table and spoke in a trembling voice. No, don't remove it. Just let me eat it. I haven't had such delicious and clean meals for a long time, and I don't want to waste them. Dora looked at me with disgust. David, you are disgusting. After saying that, she stood up and pulled Jack out of the restaurant. Let's go out to eat. After they left, I ate with big mouthfuls, wishing I could stuff it all into my mouth. Suddenly, my stomach started to churn, and I quickly got up and went to the bathroom. Lying on the toilet, I vomited out everything I had just eaten. I remember one time, they beat me so badly that I was in a coma for 2 days and 2 nights. They were afraid that I would die, and it would be difficult to explain to Dora, so they called a doctor to treat me. The doctor told me that my body was in bad condition and that I would not live long if I didn't go to the hospital for treatment. So he asked me to be mentally prepared. I stood up shakily and looked at the person in the mirror. My face was as pale as paper and had an ugly scar, just like a ghost. I thought I might be dying. The next day, Dora brought me a suit. Put on your suit and come with me to the dinner tonight. Dinner party? Before the incident in my family, I often attended various dinner parties, but now I am no longer suitable for such occasions. Dora, can I not go? You can take Jack with you. Dora got furious when she heard me reject her. David, if the client didn't value family life, do you think I would take you there? Look at the way you look now. You are just embarrassing yourself. My body trembled, remembering that she had the same expression when she misunderstood me and pushed Jack down the stairs 4 years ago. I was so scared that I knelt on the ground and kowtowed reflexively. Dora, don't be angry. I want to go. I will be obedient. Please don't send me back to the basement. Please. Dora was stunned for a moment, then continued. I'm telling you, behave yourself. If you ruin my project, I won't forgive you. Don't worry, I will behave well. I didn't want to be sent back to the basement and have to please Dora. In the evening, there was a banquet with great feasting. I stood next to Dora, wearing a baggy suit. I no longer had any trace of my former elegance and handsomeness, and looked like a clown. She had it made to my size 4 years ago, but I've lost a lot of weight, so it doesn't fit. Dora asked me to toast the clients, and I raised my glass. The client looked at my hand in surprise. David, your fingers. I froze for a moment. In the basement, they often punished me with all kinds of props and pulled out all my fingernails, causing my fingers to be severely deformed now. I stammered. My hand was injured. The customer nodded. I was in such a state of embarrassment that I found an excuse to leave the venue and went to the restroom. Jack followed in. David, listen to me. Shinru is mine. I didn't say anything. He grabbed my collar. There was no one else around, so he stopped pretending and asked with a vicious expression. Weren't you very arrogant before? Why are you dumb now? Jack first returned to China. He provoked me several times. I couldn't help it and always quarreled with him. But 4 years in the basement, living a painful and torturous life, had completely worn away my pride and self-esteem. Jack, I wish you and Dora a happy marriage and a long life together. Jack narrowed his eyes and said proudly, You are self-aware. If you dare to snatch Shinru from me again, I will make you stay in the basement forever. Jack went out. I dragged my weak body out of the bathroom. Suddenly, my nose started bleeding 1 drop, 2 drops, and more. I reached out to cover my nostrils, but it couldn't stop the bleeding. The white shirt underneath was stained red, and I collapsed to the ground. Someone happened to pass by and shouted when he saw this. Oh no, someone has fainted here. He's covered in blood. Is he going to die soon? 4. In the chaos, I seemed to see Dora rushing towards me. She was very anxious. She helped me up and kept calling my name. David. I must have seen it wrong. Why would she care about me? If I died, she could be with Jack without any worries. I had a very long dream. When I was a child, my parents were very busy with work, so they sent me to the Mo family. Sometimes I would be in a bad mood and refuse to eat, but Dora would always patiently coax me and feed me. She would also share her favorite toys with me and tell jokes to make me laugh. Gradually, I fell in love with her, followed her every day, and fantasized about marrying her when I grew up, because I am very happy with her. But Dora became increasingly cold towards me, and later I found out that she was in love. I didn't want to get involved in their relationship, so I gave up until she broke up with me later, and then my hope was rekindled. It so happened that the 2 families were interested in an alliance, and I was very happy. Dora doesn't like me smoking, so I quit smoking. She doesn't like me going to social events, so I don't go. I won't refuse anything she says. I just hope she likes me more. I thought sincerity could be exchanged for sincerity. But I was wrong. When I woke up in a daze, I heard Dora asking the doctor, "What disease does he have? Why is he bleeding from the nose?" The doctor was about to answer when I said aloud, "I'm fine." Dora about my condition. The doctor said, "There's nothing wrong with David's body. He probably got a fever, and that's why he had a nosebleed." I don't know if it was my illusion, but Dora was relieved when she heard the doctor say that I was just having a nosebleed because of a sore throat. She turned to look at me and said unhappily, "David, the doctor said you're fine. Don't be so hypocritical and waste medical resources lying in the hospital." She thought I was pretending to be seriously ill to gain her sympathy. I didn't explain and just coughed a few times. "Dora, I'm really fine. After I'm discharged from the hospital, we'll go through the divorce procedures." Hearing this, Dora said angrily, "What nonsense are you talking about? When did I say I wanted to divorce you?" After saying that, she walked out of the ward. I don't understand. She doesn't love me. The person she loves is Jack. Why doesn't she want to divorce me? The doctor asked me puzzledly, "David, why didn't you let Miss Simone know that you didn't have much time left?" I pursed my bloodless lips and said, "My business has nothing to do with her." In the afternoon, the two elders of the Mo family came to the hospital to see me. Seeing that I had lost a lot of weight, Mo's mother's eyes turned red. She and my mother have been close friends for many years, and that is why I would often go to the Mo family when I was a child. "How come you were so thin? Didn't Shinru say that you went to a foreign company to expand business? Are you having a hard time abroad?" It turned out that Dora lied to them and told them that I went to work abroad. The two elders of the Mo family have always been nice to me. I can feel the warmth of family love from them. Mo's mother even brought me chicken soup. When I thought of my parents, I couldn't help crying. Father Mo patted my shoulder to comfort me. "You're still young. It's okay. Wait until your body recovers, and then start over." I didn't tell them that I didn't have a chance to start over. I checked out of the hospital that same day because I didn't have much time left and I didn't want to waste it in the hospital. 5. I lay on the floor instead of sleeping on the bed because the mattress was too soft and comfortable for me. In the middle of the night, I was awakened by a nightmare. I woke up in a cold sweat, thinking about what happened in the basement. I raised my hands to cover my face. Tears overflowed from between my fingers, and my heart felt a suffocating pain. On the third day, Dora came to the door. "David, what do you mean you left the hospital without permission and didn't go home?" I looked at her. "Dora, please let me go. I beg you." Dora was full of doubts. "David, do you know what you were talking about? Is there water in your brain?" She took me away by force, regardless of my wishes. Back at the villa, Jack looked at me with a complaining tone. "David, you are such a fool. Shinru has been looking for you everywhere these past 2 days. Even if you want to be angry, you don't have to disappear. We are all very worried about you." When I heard what he said, I just found it ridiculous, but I was too lazy to talk nonsense with him. Seeing my silence, Jack showed an aggrieved expression. "David, I just want to advise you not to disappear in the future. I don't mean anything else. Don't be angry. I apologize to you." Dora immediately frowned and scolded me. "David, Jack means well. Don't be so shameless." I felt very uncomfortable and I didn't want to argue with her. When Dora wanted to say something else, her cell phone rang. As she walked towards the stairs, she said to the person on the other end of the phone, "Wait a moment. I'll send you the information now." After Dora disappeared into the living room, Jack raised his fist and hit me in anger. I dodged sideways and he missed me, looking at me angrily. "How dare you hide?" I said coldly. "Jack, you will get your comeuppance." At this time, Dora came down. "What's going on?" Jack said with red eyes. "Nothing. Maybe Phone is still angry with me." Dora thought I was bullying Jack. "David, what are you crazy about?" I didn't hear a word she said. My nose was bleeding again, my head was dizzy, and my vision became blurry. In a trance, I saw Dora's panic. "David, what's wrong with you? Speak up." My eyes went dark, and I fell straight down. When I woke up again, I found myself lying on a hospital bed. I shook my head and smiled bitterly. I didn't want to die in the hospital, but I couldn't escape my fate and was sent back. I heard an argument outside the ward. "It's Dora," she questioned the doctor. "Didn't you say he was fine last time? Why did he faint and have a nosebleed again?" The doctor probably felt that he could no longer conceal the truth. So he said truthfully, "Actually, David is very ill. He only has a week at most." "Impossible. You're talking nonsense." Dora interrupted the doctor without thinking. "I don't believe it. How could he get sick out of nowhere?" The doctor was helpless and said, I am telling the truth. If you don't believe me, you can look at the medical records. He sighed and continued, David's illness must have lasted for several years. If he had received treatment earlier, he might have had a chance of survival. Dora couldn't believe it and murmured to herself, why didn't he tell her he was sick? Why? She suddenly thought of something and called several bodyguards in the basement. I asked you to teach David some rules and make him behave. What did you do to him? The bodyguards looked at each other and dared not speak. Dora's temper flared up and she kicked him. Are you all mute? Chapter 6. The bodyguards knelt down, begging for mercy and explaining, Dora, we are innocent. Jack gave us money to torture David according to his wishes. Dora's pupils trembled suddenly, and she took a few steps back, obviously a little shocked. She took a deep breath and whispered, Tell me, how did you torture him? There was a moment of silence, and the bodyguards exchanged glances, as if they were hesitating. But under Dora's gaze, they finally began to confess. A bodyguard whispered, We beat David every day and tortured him a lot. The following words became more and more specific, and the content made people feel nervous. Dora did not interrupt them, but stood quietly, with her head down and an unreadable expression. I could not see her face clearly, and I couldn't help wondering what she was thinking. Sitting on the hospital bed, listening to these cold statements, I felt like I was reliving that nightmare all over again. Every word was like a knife stabbing into my chest, and I couldn't help but hold my heart. The pain was unbearable. I don't know how long it was before Dora walked into the ward and saw me sitting up with a hint of surprise in her eyes. David, you're awake, she said softly, with a hint of alienation in her tone. Do you want anything to eat? I'll ask the kitchen to bring it over. I originally thought that she would feel guilty knowing what I had been through in the past 4 years. However, her tone was as calm as if nothing had happened, and I could no longer suppress my anger. Enough! I roared. Dora, you locked me in the basement to make me learn my lesson, right? Now I have learned my lesson and no longer have any illusions about you. Why are you still not letting me go? She seemed a little flustered, her eyes flickering. I didn't know they would do that to you. I really didn't know. I ignored her and pulled up my clothes, revealing my scarred skin. At that moment, the air seemed to freeze. Dora's face suddenly changed, and her hand unconsciously covered her mouth. I sneered, as if I saw her fear. Have you ever fought with a dog for food before? If you lose, you have to accept the punishment. Do you know what it feels like to have your tendons cut? That kind of pain goes deep into your bones, and you can't even cry. The pain of these 4 years has been deeply engraved in my heart and cannot be erased. I have never had a decent meal, never had a good night's sleep, and every day was spent in pain. Dora's face turned paler and paler. She shook her head repeatedly. It wasn't me. I didn't ask them to do this to you, David. I really didn't ask them to do this. Her voice became more urgent, as if she was desperately defending herself. David, you believe me. I looked at her and smiled coldly. Her explanation was just an empty excuse. I knew that the truth behind everything was actually related to Jack. But now, I was no longer in the mood to care about it. You take a rest first. She suddenly changed the subject, avoiding his gaze. I'll ask someone to make your favorite meal and send it over. Eat something first. I stared at her. The anger in my eyes almost swallowed her. Dora. I shouted coldly. She didn't dare look at me. Her eyes were downcast, and she never looked at me. What's wrong? Her voice was trembling. I'm dying, I said calmly. She turned her head sharply. Her eyes instantly reddened. David, just consider this as a plea from me. Please don't appear in front of me for the rest of your days, okay? I said this almost gritting my teeth. Dora's eyes became empty. She held my hand tightly and said emotionally, David, I regret it. I shouldn't have sent you to the basement 4 years ago. I was wrong. It was the first time she admitted her mistake, but I felt a deep indifference. I didn't waver at all. I just sneered and pulled my hand back. It's too late. My voice was low, like an echo from the abyss. Dora, if God gives me another chance to start over, I will definitely choose not to have met you, and I will not marry you. My heart was as cold as ice. The thing I regret most in my life is falling in love with you. Chapter 7. If I hadn't fallen in love with her, perhaps my life wouldn't be what it is now. Although there might be no love and there might not be marriage, I would be a carefree young master of the Shin family, inheriting the family business, and living a not-so-gorgeous but very stable life. Unfortunately, I chose to love her, chose to marry her, and ultimately chose this road of endless pain. Dora's legs softened, and she knelt down in front of me. Her eyes were filled with regret and anxiety. David, will you forgive me? I will spend the rest of my life making it up to you and making you forget everything that happened before. I smiled, but with tears in my eyes. I can't forget it. Now, I have nightmares every night. Every time I close my eyes, those painful memories in the basement will come back to my mind. Once, I really loved you and wanted to give you the best things in the world. But now, I just want to stay away from you and never want to see you again. Just when the atmosphere was tense, the door of the ward was suddenly pushed open, and Jack appeared at the door. He showed a look of concern. Shinru, I heard that David was hospitalized. Is he okay? Dora turned her head sharply, her eyes full of anger. Don't you know whether David is okay or not, Jack? Jack was slightly stunned, with a trace of guilt in his eyes. Shinru, what are you talking about? I don't understand. Dora couldn't bear it any longer. She grabbed Jack's collar and shouted, You actually ordered those people to abuse David behind my back and tortured him into this state today. Jack wanted to argue. Shinru, please listen to my explanation. This is not what you think. Shut up. Dora's voice was full of chillness. Her eyes were like ice, and she would not tolerate any excuses. Jack coldly. They have all told me, Jack. You should know that no one can hurt David. You let him become like this. I will make you pay for it. Jack's face changed drastically. He immediately realized that Dora was not joking. His whole body began to tremble, and his voice of begging for mercy became urgent. Shinru, I love you too much. If the Shin family hadn't proposed a marriage, we wouldn't have separated. I'm unwilling to lose you like this. I just want to be with you. David doesn't deserve to live in this world. If it weren't for him, we would have been married a long time ago. I thought Dora would be shaken by these words, but she wasn't. Her eyes became more determined, even cold. You know he deserves to die, she sneered. Do you really think that with your so-called love, you can do these things, hurt him, and destroy him? She ordered the bodyguards to drag Jack to the basement where I had stayed. Jack struggled desperately and cursed me. Dora couldn't stand it anymore, so she stepped forward and gave him a loud slap in the face. Jack, you still have the nerve to scold David? You can't hurt him again while I'm here. Finally, Jack was dragged away, and Dora's eyes gradually turned cold. She asked someone to investigate the truth of 4 years ago and learned that everything was a carefully planned frame-up by Jack. The incident of him pushing down the stairs was a conspiracy directed and acted by him from beginning to end. After learning the truth, Dora felt even more guilty. She stayed in the hospital every day, taking care of me all the time. Although her care was as light as air, I couldn't accept it. My heart was dead, and there was no ripple at all. She consulted many doctors, but all efforts were in vain. You quacks, if you don't find a way to cure David, I will close your hospital. Dora was furious and scolded the group of doctors. Faced with her anger, the doctors in the hospital were overwhelmed, but they were powerless. No matter how hard they tried, the condition continued to deteriorate. Dora lowered her head, tears flashing in her eyes, her lips trembling slightly, and her voice was hoarse. David, don't worry, there will be a way. I won't let you die. I closed my eyes and said nothing. My body was already at its limit. How could I snatch my life back from the hands of death? My heart was already dead. How could I possibly live again? That afternoon, Dora pushed me in a wheelchair to the basement. When I reached the door, my body trembled unconsciously. Recalling the hell I had been in, I felt a chill rising from the soles of my feet. She patted my hand gently and comforted me tenderly. It's okay, David. Don't be afraid. I'm here. Chapter 8. I didn't respond to her call, and Dora didn't seem to care. She pushed me silently and slowly went downstairs to the basement. As soon as I stepped into the dark space of the basement, the scene in front of me made my heart sink instantly. Jack was hanging in the air. His body was covered with scars, bloodstains. His skin was torn, and he exuded a chilling aura. He looked like he had been through hellish torture. The man who used to be so high and mighty and looked down on everything has now become like this, which makes people feel inexplicably cold. Jack saw Dora come in. A faint glimmer of hope flashed in his eyes, and he immediately groaned in pain. Shinru, put me down. I can't stand it. My whole body is in pain. I can't hold on any longer. However, Dora showed no mercy. Her cold voice was as chilling as the wind. This is just the beginning. I want you to experience all the sufferings David has gone through. Don't ever think of leaving here again in your life. Jack opened his eyes wide in shock, and a crazy smile appeared on his face. Dora, do you think I was the one who killed David? It's not me, it's you. For years ago, if you hadn't acquiesced to all that, how could I have controlled those bodyguards? You spoiled me. And that's why I had the opportunity to torture David into what he is today. Dora's face turned pale instantly, and she denied it with a trembling voice. No, it's not like that, it's not me. Jack's laughter became more hysterical. It was you, Dora. You made those people obey my orders and locked David in the basement. It was all your fault. If it weren't for your false accusation, David wouldn't have been tortured like this. His words were like a sharp sword, piercing Dora's heart. Her body trembled. Her lips were tightly closed, and she never spoke. Jack laughed up to the sky, wantonly venting his twisted mentality. Admit it, Dora, you were just a two-timing woman. If you really loved David, how could you have locked him up here for 4 years? How could you still be with me every day? You were just a scumbag. David will never forgive you. Sooner or later, you will lose everyone who loves you. At this moment, Dora's anger finally erupted. She picked up the whip and lashed Jack hard, her voice becoming more and more urgent. David will definitely avenge me for what you did. I will never let you get away with it easily. However, I stood there, feeling no pleasure at all. I should have felt pleasure from Jack as punishment, but at the moment, I felt nothing. Perhaps it was because I was dying and all the pain and revenge had lost their meaning. When we left the basement, Dora suddenly knelt down in front of me, tears streaming down her face. Honey, I love you. This word husband made my heart tremble slightly. We have been married for many years, and she has never called me like this. She held my hand tightly, her eyes burning. I know that the mistakes I made cannot be made up for, but please believe that I really love you. I slowly pried open her fingers with a cold expression. The person you love has never been me. No, I love you. It's just that I didn't realize my feelings before. I was wrong. I am sorry. She cried even more painfully, her voice full of regret. I had longed to hear Dora say she loved me, especially during our wedding. We were like many newlyweds, full of expectations and hopes. At that time, she would accompany me to auctions to buy my favorite collectibles. She would prepare surprise gifts for my birthday. We also discussed having a daughter like her in the future and prepared for pregnancy for a long time. However, everything changed when Jack came back in her life. Dora became colder to me, often stayed out all night, and lied about working overtime, but in fact, she was with Jack. Her heart no longer belonged to me. She continued crying. Hubby, will you forgive me? I looked at her calmly and whispered, I forgive you. Without love, there is no hate. The relationship between us has long been severed. Dora took me back to the hospital and ordered the doctors to do everything they could to save me. However, when she left the ward, I sneaked out of the hospital and came to the seaside I had longed for since childhood. When I was a child, I always dreamed of going to the beach to play with my parents one day, but they were always busy. When I grew up, I wanted to go there with Dora, but it never happened. Now, I am here alone. I sat by the sea, gazing at the endless ocean, feeling a sense of peace in my heart. The wind blew gently across my face. My eyelids gradually became heavy. I closed my eyes, and my hands on my knees slid down. Dora started looking for me, and finally found my body on the beach. She almost collapsed, unable to believe that I was dead, and begged the doctor to continue resuscitation several times. But her prayers did not bring any miracle. The doctor was helpless, and it wasn't until my body began to decompose that she finally had to accept the fact. A few months later, Dora still said to herself, Honey, I knew you would come back. You were just angry, right? I'm sorry, husband. When you come back, I will never make you angry again, and we will live a good life in the future. There was a strong desire in her voice, as if she was expecting me to come back to her. However, we no longer have a future. As time went by, Dora's company fell into financial trouble due to her negligence and eventually declared bankruptcy. She continued to be indifferent to the news of my death. 3 months later, Dora died in a car accident. Some passersby said that she did not accidentally crash into traffic, while others believed that she was mentally ill and failed to avoid oncoming cars, and eventually died in the car accident. At the same time, Jack chose to commit suicide because he could not bear the torture in the basement. Dora's death. I thought I could finally be free from the pain. However, fate did not seem to let me go. One night, I received a strange phone call. It was Dora's mother on the other end of the phone. Her voice was cold and gloomy. Do you think everything is over? David, you are wrong. I couldn't understand what she said.